Hello, and welcome to the Consumer VC podcast, where we discuss the intersection of venture capital and consumer innovation. I'm your host, Mike Gelb, and if you're enjoying the show, you can subscribe to my newsletter where you'll receive every new episode a week early. Head to theconsumervc.com and push subscribe. All content and episodes are for informational entertainment purposes only and are not investment advice. Our guest today is Ashleigh Hinde, founder and CEO of Waldo. Waldo makes daily contact lenses without the hassle or price tag. We discuss how she's building a brand with a product you can't see, how she approaches e-commerce and retail, and why she founded a contact lens company in the first place. Without further ado, here's Ashleigh. Ashleigh, thank you so much for joining me here today. How are you?
Hey, Mike. Good. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. Yeah, so excited to talk about Waldo.
Thanks for having us.
I really appreciate you coming on the show. Start from the very beginning. What was the insight or pain point that you went through that led to the founding of Waldo?
Twofold, really. On the one hand, I've been a contact lens wearer since I was 11 years old. And frankly, it's always been a pain point getting my contact lenses, actually, regardless of the country even. So in South Africa, where I'm from, or, when I lived in the UK or even the US, this pain point existed, this friction around experience and price. And really, I think my own gratitude for the product, I've always been very grateful that contact lenses exist. And so as a result, pretty passionate about the product itself, as well as it being such a sort of daily routine in my life. And then the second piece is that my mom is blind in one eye. And so I've experienced firsthand what the loss of vision has on a person, and I suppose the immediate community around them. And so I've always had quite an obsession, I'd say, actually, with vision and sight as a whole. And so when I moved to the States in 2016 and I ran out of contact lenses, I went online to, try and get the brand that I was used to wearing, and just really found the whole process difficult to navigate. And at that point, I decided, actually, hold on, this has been difficult from day one of me wearing contacts. I want to dig deeper here and try and understand the industry. And so that was essentially where the problem was born from.
I really appreciate you sharing that and the two reasons and your motivations behind it. One is as a personal pain point in the experience, part of the actual purchasing contacts, since you're a contact user, and also the inspiration from your mother and knowing how important obviously vision is to all of us. Can you walk us through what the typical, I'm not a contact wearer. I've been fortunate. I haven't had to wear glasses or contacts, but would love to kind of understand what specifically about the experience that you really disliked and what you wanted to change, and the early signs that you could change it with Waldo.
First and foremost, I think one of the pain points that we're trying to solve for is access to the industry. So what we find is that generally consumers are pretty late and their eyesight is already quite bad by the time they go and visit their eye care provider. And we really want to make the eye care experience such that patients are going to visit their eye doctors much sooner and a lot more frequently. So because the onset is slow, generally people don't realize that there's a problem until pretty far down the line. So the first friction point, I think, is actually entering the eye care industry and having that first appointment with your doctor. And then the second pain point is, I think, once you have had that, once you've got that relationship with your doctor and once you've had your eye exam, then navigating which product is right for you and what price point is very difficult. And so a lot of the big manufacturers, I think, have purposefully kept the consumer at a distance from how they talk about their product. So we find that, consumers know very little about actually why they wear the contact lenses that they do and why they're priced the way that they are. And so what Waldo is trying to solve for on the product front is really being very transparent, not using any jargon, and being very open about this is what makes a good quality contact lens. This is what you should be looking for. And this is the price. And it's going to stay that price regardless really of what platform you buy it for. So there's no coupons and rebates and sort of all these different pricing mechanics to navigate with us. And then sort of the final or the last sort of stage of that consumer journey, I think, is continuing to be a company that is both medical in nature. Contact lenses are a medical device, and eye care is, within the medical industry, but adding a human-centered approach to that. So making sure that our customers feel like there is a person on the other end of the phone or the laptop or, whatever means of communication, and keeping them engaged in eye care as a whole, and as well as that looping in the doctor. So that's our goal, essentially, keeping eye care top of mind and removing friction through pricing and ease of distribution.
Once you realize that, okay, there's an opportunity here to really also create with, on top of all these things, I know that you said it before, kind of a human experience and kind of a brand within the contact industry. When you were kind of formulating all this, like, what is a little bit about like the supply chain, the manufacturing side towards contact lenses? Are there only like a handful globally, and then is it kind of like a commoditized product, or is there more to it? Like, how do you think about innovation on the product side?
So we're pretty much dealing with an oligopoly. There's three big players that control 88% of the market. J&J has the lion's share with almost 40%. And so as a result, this very big industry has been held in the hands of just a few. And the way that those manufacturers typically get their products into the hands of consumers is through a distributor and then onto another platform, whether that platform is an e-commerce website or a group of eye doctors. Typically, there's around two companies removed at least in that consumer journey.
The actual brands that goes onto the contacts, are those the same brands as the manufacturers, or are those the distributors that have those brands?
Yeah, so those are the same brands as the manufacturers. So the manufacturer owns the IP of the product and the IP of the brand. They sell onto a distributor. The distributor then sells onto either another distributor that's consumer facing, such as any of the contact lens online platforms, or they'll sell into a group of optometrists who then sell on to the customer.
Got it.
So the distributors are essentially the logistics providers for the manufacturers.
On the brand piece, how also do you think about building a brand in a invisible product? I mean, I know we've seen obviously like Warby Parker do it with glasses, right? And build an extremely compelling brand using online channels to do so initially. But how do you think about this with contacts, since this is more invisible to glasses? You don't have a frame per se.
Yeah, sure. So great question. I've had that question actually a lot from investors that say, why do you need to build, or why is brand important for a product that you can't even see? And they often use that analogy of frames or sunglasses because it's so visible and it's such a sort of fashion statement, if you will. And Warby has done such a great job at building their brand in that category. With contact lenses, the way that I think about it is, although it's an invisible product, it's still a highly personal and quite intimate product. So you're using it every day. It's the starting point of people's day, and you're putting it in your eye. And so just because that experience is not necessarily shared or seen with others, that doesn't mean that the brand is any less important. And I think some great parallels in that respect are the multi-billion-dollar beauty industry or makeup industry. When you look at somebody, you don't necessarily know what cream they use, but people can become quite kind of high affinity for whatever brand it is that they use in the privacy of their bathroom. And so that's the way we think about contact lenses. I think a lot of our competitors might think about contact lenses as just being a commoditized product, and therefore the experience doesn't really matter. We feel very strongly that the experience does matter. And when you incorporate contact lenses into your morning routine, you should feel great about the box that you're opening and the lens that you're putting in your eye.
So you're thinking about all these kind of things about contacts. Of course, this is very personal to you since you're a contact user and, especially with your mom as well, literally understanding, obviously like the importance of vision. What were kind of the first steps that you took in order to actually found this company? How did you kind of structure it? I'd imagine that you probably started off selling online, but just kind of also love to kind of hear about how you thought about distribution and as well as getting the manufacturer on the board and then as well as price too. Because as you say, it's like $600, $700 typically for J&J. Like, how did you think about making like that price much more affordable and accessible to everyone else?
So the starting point was around distribution, price, and quality. So I think initially I set out with the question of, is it possible for me to get access to contact lenses that are akin or better to some of these big pharmaceutical brands out there? And out of interest, what do they cost to manufacture? And so I started off essentially just doing a deep dive on the industry and reaching out to a couple of those manufacturers, asking for pricing, asking for product characteristics, really just getting under the skin of what makes a good contact lens and how much do they cost to manufacture. Once I figured that out, I essentially felt really ripped off as a consumer. And so figured out that, the markups on these products are absolutely ridiculous. And I think it just shouldn't be the case for a product that is such a necessary daily healthcare need. So I think that perhaps that anger sort of fueled me to keep on going. And so secondary to, solving for and doing a deep dive on the industry and distribution, I thought about how can we streamline that route to consumer so that we can really build a close relationship with the customer, because I never felt like I had any affinity with the brand that I was using or really even knew why I used it. And so shortening that distribution and not using a third-party distributor was the second piece of that, because we wanted to keep margins as tight as possible.
That makes a lot of sense. And as you kind of point out, when it comes to margins, they should be a lot more sensitive, given that this is, medical devices, this is someone's vision. Instead of, I'm just thinking about products that have really high margins, like beauty and personal care products typically have, 80, 90% margins. And maybe some of them are for, medical purposes, but I'd imagine like the large majority aren't. But that actually makes sense. They can kind of market it that way and also be sustainable in that way. So
basically daily contact lenses are the most expensive. Bi-weekly lenses, which you change every 2 weeks, are in the middle. And then the cheapest would be monthly contact lenses. And so what ends up happening is that consumers that are price sensitive end up buying monthly contact lenses, which are far less hygienic for your eyes and really just not good for eye health whatsoever. So you end up compromising on eye health for price, which just shouldn't be the case.
On the brand side of things, I know we talked about the importance of you building a brand online. How did you approach building Waldo? What were kind of some of the themes that you wanted, even in your marketing and even, as you said, it was very important for you when you actually received the contacts that it was really an amazing experience being able to actually open it up in the box. And so how did you kind of approach that side of it too?
When we were building the brand, I started with thinking about, what do I want the company to stand for? And how is that different to how, the incumbents are speaking to their customers? And so quality is, first and foremost central to what we do. We do not compromise on quality or innovation, never mind the price. So that is sort of baseline for us. And you can see that in the way that we've really focused on product in the company. So we've just launched vitamin contact lenses where the saline solution is infused with vitamin B12. And, that's great for consumers that have drier eyes and, wear contact lenses for longer during the day. But even that innovative product is still less than the entry level price point of some of our sort of large pharmaceutical competitors. So innovation and quality first. And so I've always wanted the experience of Waldo to feel premium. And so we think about that in the way that our site looks, the way that customer service handles comms, the way that the box arrives at your door, but also going the extra mile. So, being a high quality product and company also extends to how are we going beyond and doing more. And so, not just on the innovation front, but also on how do we give back? Like we've got a partnership with Site Savers that a portion of every sale goes to restoring sight in some way. So for every contact lens subscription, we donate a cataracts treatment. For every bottle of eye drops, a trachoma treatment, and every pair of glasses, a pair of prescription frames. So everything we do must feel high quality and premium, step one. Step two, we should always be accessibly priced and affordable. So we benchmark ourselves against competitors and we push hard for efficiency in manufacturing and all through our supply chain to make sure that we're able to deliver high quality products at an affordable price point. And then the third piece was human-centered. So because our competitors are these giant multi-billion-dollar corporations, it never feels like there's somebody else on the other side. I mean, if I've got a problem with my AccuView lenses, for instance, I wouldn't know who to contact a J&J, for instance. And so human-centered and making sure that we feel like a company and are a company with real people behind the curtain that you can speak to at any time, I think that becomes a real moat. So I started the company thinking about those values. Those are our three values, and that's where we invested. So quality and innovation, making sure that there's efficiency and we can be accessibly priced. And then, obviously, and then the human-centered piece, making sure that comes through.
I know you said how when you actually were digging in first the industry and looking at these margin profiles of some of these companies, you were like, oh my gosh, this is crazy how much these massive margins that people are making. And this is a need. This is vision. This is, one of the five senses. But what we've also seen as a theme when it comes to, because I'd imagine that you're also able to get higher margins since you're selling online. You don't have to kind of go through some of those like distribution channels, which kind of just suck out a lot of your margin there. But we've also seen, advertising costs, CAC for online just become, really high. I was just looking at a Twitter thread and someone said, oh, well, D2C is no longer sustainable, which I disagree with. But I'm kind of wondering, has that been the case as well in your category? Because I do think that a lot of this stuff is very category dependent on CAC increasing or not. And as well as, have you had to rethink it all, price and margin based off of that kind of thing happening?
We have definitely experienced that. I think anybody that's running an e-commerce business has. We've been pretty, I don't want to say lucky, but we've been very focused on efficient customer acquisition. So we wouldn't change our margin or pricing strategy to, in essence, be able to pay Facebook or Google more to acquire customers, because that pricing and accessibility pillar is so critical to the business. So we just think about ways that we can be smarter through referral campaigns and using new channels and testing new creative, doing as much as we can on that front. But what I do think becomes a challenge with D2C or e-commerce customers is that it's a pretty different demographic if you are selling online and primarily through social media channels. And so if your goal as a brand is to become a mass market brand, then you need to think about where are my customers and how can I make that channel work. And it was that thinking rather than rising costs of digital that was the premise behind our partnership with Walmart.
Can you dive a little deeper into that in terms of how that came about and also what that kind of partnership entails? Because I know that is like a pretty big part of your strategy with that partnership with Walmart. And why did you choose to partner with obviously one of the biggest retailers as opposed to also going direct to consumer with creating your own stores?
We're actually not planning on going into mass retail now. Like that was in our plan for next year. But, we met with Walmart at the beginning of the year. And as I was speaking with their team about what they think is the future of vision. And as I was telling them what we were focusing on building, there was actually a lot of alignment. And, if you think about some of the core pillars that I spoke about now with Waldo, which is, high quality products, accessibly priced and in a human centric way, Walmart's values are, essentially live better and save money. And so there was a lot of parallel between the way that, both companies were thinking about vision care. And I was really excited about that. And I think there was just so much synergy. And, for Walmart, Waldo really represents a different kind of brand, and a brand that resonates with perhaps a wider demographic than usual for them. And for us, obviously, it represents a new demographic of consumer, but also, and almost more importantly, a wider range of doctors to build relationships with, because we still fundamentally believe that is a critical component of this whole eye care journey. And I think too often D2C companies come in and almost create this narrative that it's either online or nothing, like online and offline cannot coexist. And I just, in this category specifically, I don't think that that's true. And then as far as, going out and building our own stores, we thought about that. It's not really where our core skills lie. It would be very capital intensive for us to acquire those skills and actually start to build stores. And I don't really think that that's where the customer need necessarily is. I think there are so many, great there's more than 40,000 optometrists around the US. I don't think the issue is the shortage of optometrists or optical centers. I think that the shortage or the lack is on quality experience at a better price.
I know that Waldo, it started off when you were in the UK and then you expanded to the US. How do you think about geographic expansion? How was that transition going from the UK to the US? And if you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I came up with Waldo and started working on it in the US, but I just fairly recently, I suppose, moved across from the UK. One of the core differences between the US and the UK market is that actually contact lenses are a lot cheaper. And actually pretty across the board, healthcare products are a lot cheaper. And so my thinking was, if we can get traction in a market where price is not the main driver, so if we can get traction because of the product quality and innovation and the user experience, then that sets us up really nicely to expand into the US with some customer data under our belt, and and then the plus side of also being 30% cheaper than the incumbent. So that was some of my thinking around that. But the UK remains, an important part of our strategy and an important market for us. But the US is our bread and butter. So I've, moved back to the US now, and that's our focus. I don't think we'll be focused on geographic expansion for a little while, especially, I suppose, also given the macro environment at the moment. I think we'll focus on where we...
That makes sense given the macro environment, and as well, just probably also just want to focus as well on this partnership with Walmart, which is incredible. How did you also think and approach fundraising?
The way that I wanted to go about fundraising initially was to bootstrap it. That's always been my kind of go-to, right? Like, I was pretty new to the whole fundraising world when I started Waldo. But given the industry, given that it's healthcare, given that it's not really something that you can self-fund, or I suppose, let me rephrase that, not something that I could have self-funded at all, I sort of realized fairly early on in the business case that I would need to raise capital. And so I sent the business plan around to some friends in finance asking for advice and feedback. And pretty quickly, we had a group of angels that wanted to put, checks in. But to be honest, knowing what I know now, I would have had a much more robust fundraising plan in place, I think, before I started the business. It was a little ad hoc.
I appreciate you sharing that. What was the biggest reason why an investor would pass on Waldo? What was maybe the most compelling part that you thought of the business why an investor would want to invest?
Some of the reasons that we got for why an investor passed in the early days, I suppose, like single founder was one of them. So, I had the feedback that if you had a male co-founder, like, I think you'd be much better placed to raise more capital. That was an interesting conversation. So that was one. I think another was actually your point around how do you build a brand with an invisible product and, in a space that has the potential to become a lot more commoditized. So how do you build moats around that, which I think is, a valid concern, but I think through innovation and creating a sort of sublime user experience. I'd say those were the two major feedbacks that we got. And then on the why would an investor invest? I mean, eye care is a really massive space. It's been pretty undisrupted to date. There's only a handful of really big players, and typically the multiples in the space exceed that of other consumer categories. So it's a highly profitable category with very little disruption. And I think, the investors that we've partnered with have really understood that Waldo is not just a contact lens subscription company. We are building a modern day eye care company. And that's a much broader vision, but it's nuanced, right? Like, I don't think we haven't really seen anybody else doing it. So yeah, I think that's why they would invest.
When you say modern day eye care company, are there additional products that you've been thinking about releasing?
Yeah, so we have expanded beyond just contact lenses. So we sell drops and blue light glasses, and we'll continue to expand our range within the eye care. And I say eye care to sort of differentiate against eyewear. I don't think at this stage necessarily we would go into frames, but there's a whole range of eye care products that we could expand into. And so we're thinking about that and innovations within that space. And then secondly, we are building technology to assist with essentially scanning the front of the eye and making that relationship between optometrist and patient much more seamless, and using technology to strengthen that relationship so that essentially, without necessarily giving too much away because we haven't launched it yet, but essentially giving optometrists the tools to scan their patients' eyes, and when the customer comes back, they've got a reference point and we'll be able to see, how has the cornea changed, and essentially just make eye care front of mind.
What's one book that's inspired you personally and one book that's inspired you professionally?
So professionally, it's The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. I just think it's the most fantastic book about being a CEO and being a founder. And it's funny and it's just amazing. So that stands out above all the others. And then personally, I can't remember the author, but there's a book called Design Your Life, and it's written by two ex-Apple product designers. And essentially they draw parallels between their frameworks for designing products to frameworks to design your life. And I just thought that was a really interesting book, personally. It covers a lot of professional stuff too, but...
That's awesome. We've had a few other guests talk about hard things before, but I don't think we've actually had anyone bring up designing your life. So excited to add that to the book list. It's great. My final question for you, what is the best piece of advice that you've received?
Ordinarily, my answer to this question would be ask for money and you get feedback. Ask for feedback and you get money. It's a little more nuanced than that. But in a nutshell, like, ask people for feedback. I think often entrepreneurs, and I just speak for myself, like perhaps particularly female entrepreneurs, we want to have the idea so fully formed before we put it out there to anybody to get their feedback on. And opening that up, I just think is such a valuable thing.
Ashleigh, thanks again so much for coming on the show. This has been such a pleasure.
Thanks, Mike. It was so nice to speak to you. Thank you.
And there you have it. It was such a pleasure chatting with Ashleigh. I really appreciate having her on the show. It was so much fun chatting with her about Waldo. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you'd write a review on the Apple Podcasts. You're also welcome to follow me, your host, Mike, on Twitter @MikeGelb, and also follow for episode announcements @ConsumerVC. Thanks for listening, everyone.